Shabbos says that. We are holding 62b3, the bottom. Acherim oimrim. Says the Gemara. We go further. Says the Gemara. Tanya. We learned in a brayso. Acherim oimrim. Others say acherim is usually to be assumed Rameir, the great Rabbi Meir, Rameir Balanes, whose Kustam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. An unauthored, it doesn't mention who the author is. An unauthored Mishnah is assumed to be coming from Rameir. Tanya. Acherim oimrim. Hiktim moilim la'areilim kasha. If one went with the intention, with the machshava, first he had in mind he slaughtered the Korban Pesach, having in mind those who are circumcised, and then his second thought was also for those who are uncircumcised. Okay, then it is kosher. It's kosher. It's good. The carbon is good. You started off with those who are allowed to eat on it, i.e. those who are circumcised. The fact that you also had in mind those who cannot eat on it, those who are uncircumcised, not a problem. But if you did it the opposite, you proceeded with the first machshava, was for those that were uncircumcised, and then afterwards you had for those who are circumcised, that is no good. That's already invalid. So says the Gemara. Why do we say that if you proceed with the good ones, those who are circumcised, before those who are uncircumcised, the Korban Pesach is still kosher, it's a good kosher, it's valid. The kula arla be'inin v'leka, because we need total. The only to make it invalid is if you brought it totally for the intent to bring it totally only for those who are uncircumcised. Since you have some that are already circumcised, it's not a problem. It's valid. If that's the case, then if you proceed first with the uncircumcised, and then afterwards you had the circumcised, it should still be good, because kula arobin and beleka, because the only way to invalidate it is if you bring it only with the intent to bring it only for those who are uncircumcised. But even in this case, even though you first had in mind those who were uncircumcised, but afterwards you had in mind those who are circumcised who are allowed to eat on the Korban Pesach, at the end of the day, you don't have your entire intention was not just for the uncircumcised, it was a mix. It was mixasa and moilin, mixasa and not moilin. Therefore, what's the problem? What's the difference if your first thought is for those who were circumcised, and the first thought is for those who are uncircumcised? At the end of the day, you got circumcised people in here, it should be good. So now we're on Shabbos' Daf, Samach Gimel Amid Aleph, 63a1. So it says the Gemara, Lema Kesabri Acherim. Let's say that Acherim, Rabbi Meir, okay, holds like this. With regard to Shechita, regard to slaughtering, how does slaughtering work? You cut the knife, and there are two pipes, the veshet, the food pipe, and the windpipe. Okay? It says like this, Rameya holds, Eino l'shchita ela b'sayf. There's only shchita, the actual slaughtering, is at the last moment when you finish cutting the second pipe. The beginning actions are the beginning actions of slaughtering. But when you cut, and you cut one pipe, that's not called slaughtering yet. Because at the moment, it's nothing. If you stop there, you have accomplished nothing. Says Rameir, when you go to the last, when you do the last cut of the last second pipe, that's shchita. The final cut of the second pipe, the end of the action is the shchita. Eina l'shchita ela b'sayf. Okay, therefore, if you have a machshava, the wrong kind of machshava, in other words, it's a carbon that was supposed to be a Pesach, and you have in mind the shlomim. If you have in mind the shlomim at the beginning, as you're beginning to cut, but then you remember right before you finish cutting the second, and you say, no, this is for a Pesach, it would be perfectly good. Because the first part was nothing. What defines it as a shechita? The finality of the final cut of the second pipe. Okay? Ukidu Rava, and like Rava, the Omar Rava, Adayin hu machloikis, we still have the machloikis. If you remember, we had a machloikis back. Where? Rameir holds Toifis Loshen Rishon. When a person speaks, The thing that is typhus, that counts, that has significance, is only the first words out of his mouth. Whatever the first words are, that's the definition. The fact that later on he may have contradicted what his first words are, that doesn't bother me. We go by what the first words are to define what his intent was. Rabbi Yosi argues, right? Rabbi Yosi argues and says, no, afilu typhus lashon akar. All of it counts. The entire thing that a person says, the first thing and the second thing counts. And if there's a contradiction between them, then then it's essentially meaningless. So it says like this. Adayin u'machloikis. Right now we still have the machloikis. The Rameya holds typhus lashon rishon. The first thing out of a person's mouth is what's significant. And Rabbi Yosi says that everything that's out of his mouth is typhus. We have to take into account everything. So therefore, hilkach, hiktim mulim le'arelim. If when he shechs, he first has intentions for those who are circumcised, and only afterwards he has intention for those who are not circumcised, moilin chaylin. Therefore, they're moilin chayin, arelim loy chaylin. Those who are circumcised, that goes ahead, takes effect. The second thing that he said, which was, it's also for the intention to shech for those who are arelim, non-circumcised, those who are also non-circumcised, that doesn't take an effect, because Rameir holds typhus lashon rishon. The first thing that comes out of your mouth, that's significant. The first thing that came out of his mouth was for moilin, for those who are circumcised. Perfect, we don't got a problem. So the second thing out of his mouth, I completely erase. It doesn't matter to me. It's what the first thing defines what's going on over here. But if hiktim arelim lemoilin, arelim chaylin umoilin loy chaylin. But if I go ahead and say, first I'm shechting this, I'm bringing this covenant Pesach first for those who are uncircumcised. And then as an end, I'm also bringing it for the ones who are circumcised. According to Rameh, that typhus lashon rishon, the first one thing out of your mouth is what defines. The first thing that came out of your mouth was what? The first thing that came out of your mouth was for uncircumcised. So therefore, it's no good, according to Rameh. So Omar Rabbo says, Rabbo, loy, no, I can do this the other way. You can say that Rameir holds that shechita is significant, not just at the last cut of the last pipe of the second pipe, but in fact the whole action, because the whole reason why you're picking up a pipe and slaughtering the animal is to do shechita. So from the beginning to the end is part of the entire action of shechita. It's not saying that the beginning part is nothing and only the last part, which is the trigger that obviously finishes and says this is shechita. No, it's the entirety. The moment you pick up the knife and begin to cut, that already has begun the actions of shechita. In his heart, he had in mind to slaughter the Pesach for both, for those who are circumcised, mulin, and those who are uncircumcised, arelim. Bein lemulin, bein la'arelim. But what came out of his mouth, he expressed essentially, or he was, whatever, let's call it, came out of his mouth in this case, what he came out for the sake of the arelim, the uncircumcised people. But he didn't have a chance to say, and also for those that are circumcised. When the shechita was completed, when the pleasure was completed upon the words, I am shechting this for the uncircumcised people and for the circumcised. But by the time he said the word, I am shechting for the uncircumcised, the shechita was complete. The second pipe was already cut. The Rameir, who is the Acherim, Stam Mishnah Rachelim, the others, Be'inan, the Sava, Loi Be'inan, Piv, V'Libai Shavim. You don't need that your words and your thoughts are the same. So therefore, we only consider the spoken intention, and we ignore what was your intent in your mouth. Okay, so since what was spoken was only, you said, for the uncircumcised people, even though you actually had intent to also say for the other, And since Rameh also holds Tavis Lashon Rishon, so even if you did say it afterwards, first of all, it was said after the Shechita was completed, over here, therefore, his unspoken intention for the circumcised people at this moment in time is completely irrelevant. It's no good. What was spoken was for the uncircumcised. That was the moment that the Shechita was completed. Boom, the Karban Pesach is possible, it's no good. The Rabbanan Sabri, the Rabbanan hold, no, one's words and thoughts need to coincide. Therefore, since he also had the intention, the clear intention for the sake of circumcised people, we allow, therefore, that the sacrifice is good, that the Karban Pesach is still valid. It's still valid. Because at the end of the day, even though he did say for the uncircumcised and he finished the Shechita, but since his heart was about to say those same words, also for the circumcised, it's already for the circumcised, and since there are circumcised people on this, it remains valid. But it says no. Because Rameh really hold that my words and my thoughts don't have to coincide, and we only go by the words. And since the words that came out of his mouth were just for the uncircumcised, even though it was clear that his intent was also for the circumcised, since the only words that came out of his mouth, were for the uncircumcised. That's what it is. I'm sorry, I see that I'm coming through a little blurry, but we're going to keep right on going. But the Gemara says I got a contradiction. I got another Mishnah that says in Terumos, and just the opposite. Somebody is separating out his grain. He's being makrish in order to give truma, and instead he slips out and he sees a Levi and he says Maisa, or just the opposite, Maisa the truma, right? He says meant to say Maisa, but he says truma. He says like a promise, I will not enter into Ruvain's house, but instead, that's what he meant to say. That's what he meant to say. And instead he says, I'm not going into Shimon's house. Or She'ein then a he meant to say, I will not benefit from this. This belongs to Ruvain, and instead he said, I won't benefit from something that belongs to Sheini. He didn't say it means nothing. His pronouncements are ineffective. It's not a neder. It's not a promise or a shvuah or swearing. Until his words and thoughts coincide. And you'll notice something about this Mishnah, that it doesn't have an author, and a Mishnah that doesn't have an author, Stam Mishnah, a Mishnah that's unauthored, Rameya, we assume it's Rameya. Do you see Rameya holds that Piv Levi needs to be sharpened, has to coincide? Says Elohim Rabaya, I'll tell you what's going on. Reisha the Oma, Simin Risha and the Mulim. The Brisa begins where he said that the first pipe, there are two pipes, the trachea or the esophagus. One of the two pipes. Okay, one of the two pipes, one of the first pipes, let's say the trachea. He said that pipe should be for the circumcised people. The Simon Shani, and then when he came to the esophagus, the food pipe, he goes ahead and says, Afla Reilim. That should be for the uncircumcised people. The Simon Shani, Nami, Pisiche Beis Mulin. And since, in that case, we can argue and say, since he started off with the first pipe, with the people that are circumcised, and the second pipe, he said, and the second pipe is for the people who are uncircumcised. The circumcised people are connected as well with the second pipe, and it's one long thing, and the Karban Pesach is good. Sefer the Oma, Simon Rishon La Reilim. But in the Sefer where he cut the first pipe and he said, I have intention over here for those who are uncircumcised. The Simon Sheni Lemulin, and then the second pipe, then he cuts and said, and this is for the circumcised people. Now we have a problem. The Simon Rishon, the first thing that he said, the first pipe, the first pipe had nothing to do with the uncircumcised. All he said was on the first pipe, this is being slaughtered for the uncircumcised. There's no connection. It's only the second one where he said, and that one is also for the circumcised. In the first case, he first starts off with the circumcised. And then the second pipe is for the uncircumcised. So he already started with the circumcised. It carries over to the second pipe. But where by the first pipe, he only brings down the uncircumcised, then the uncircumcised schleps itself to the second pipe. Then on the second pipe, he says, that's also for the circumcised. It means the first pipe had no intention at all for the circumcised. That's a problem. The Simon Rishon are like Pesachim said Beis Mulin. Rameya l'tamei, and Rameya, who's the Acherim, follows what he says in other places. Remember what pigul is. Pigul again is when I have a thought, when I'm slaughtering the behemoth, that I will eat it after its time frame. I'm allowed to eat it for a day and a night. I'm allowed to eat it for a day and a night. And he hasn't done, I'll eat it 2 days from now. Now, the Omar, because our mayor says, the mefagil, faglin, that somebody who has pigul, v'chatzi matir, on only a half of a permitter, it still creates pigul. What are we talking about? We're talking about in the case of a mincha, a grain offering. A grain offering has two things. It has the flour, which there is a kamitza that's taken out. If you remember, you take the 3 fingers, hard to see when I'm in shadows, take the 3 fingers, and those 3 fingers, you gather it up, and you put that onto the altar, together with the levina, the frankincense. A portion of the kamitza and the levina go up and are offered and burnt on the altar, and doing that then is the trigger that allows us now that what he called the kohen can go eat the mincha, can eat the rest of the what's left over of the carbon mincha, of the grain offering, of the flour offering. He can go ahead and offer, and they can eat it. So the trigger to allow it to be eaten is that a portion of the grain, of the portion of the flour, has to be scooped up by kamitza, placed on the altar, and the levina, the frankincense, a portion of that has to be placed on the altar as well. Once those are burnt up, brought up, then you can start going ahead and eating the food. So they're the matirin, the trigger, the permitter. When you do that, you're permitted to eat. Says Rameir, that means if you go ahead and you have a machsheves pigul, even only on one of the matirim, only on the kamitza, the levina, you said I'm going to do in the right time. But the kamitza, I say I'm going to do it on only one of them. It's still pigul, and if you eat it, you're chayav kares. Same thing over here. Same thing over here. When even though only one pipe of the Pesach was slaughtered, with the invalid intention for the uncircumcised people who are unable to eat the Pesach becomes invalid. Because you see, Rameya says that what he called the mafliga b'chatzi mati. There's such a thing as pigul, even on only half of it. You only did it on you only had pagul on the kamitza, not on the levina, or only on the levina, not the kamitza. Same thing over here. You will maflik on one of the 2 pipes that need to be slaughtered in order to be able to make this a kosher slaughtering, to be able for the karban to be eaten. You were maflik on one, essentially you blew it on one of them because you had an intention for uncircumcised people who could not eat the karban Pesach, right? The Rabbanon followed their reasoning, the Hamri, that we do not do pigul, because pigul cannot be affected to intent to part of a permitter. It cannot be part of a permitter. In other words, they say, no, it's all or nothing. Pigul, if you only have pigul on only half the trigger, only on the kamitza, but you don't have any bad thoughts regarding the levana, or just the opposite, levana but not the pigul, it's not pigul. It's not pigul. It's one package or total. It's not a half a package. Same thing over here. Same thing. The fact that one of the second pipe was not slaughtered was what he called that one of the pipes. In this case, the second pipe was slaughtered for the circumcised people. Was slaughtered for the circumcised people, even though the first pipe was for the non-circumcised people. It doesn't matter. It's only half and half. It still remains its validity. You have something to hang the validity on, and the carbon Pesach remains a kosher animal. Now the Mishnah goes further. We're not allowed to remind you, once we hit the 6.5 hour of Erev Pesach, we have to shech the carbon Pesach, but by that time you have to have gotten rid of your chametz. Because the pasuk says, Lo shishchat al chametz dam zivchi. You shall not slaughter the blood of my sacrifice over chametz. Now, it happens to be that most zivachim, you're not allowed to slaughter over chametz either. Okay, but what exactly does that mean? The Gemara, the Mishnah is going to talk over here. If one slaughters the Pesach over chametz, over b'loisaseh, he's over on a loisaseh, the loisaseh that we just said. The negative commandment is loisishchat, you shall not slaughter al chametz over chametz, dam zivti, the blood of my sacrifices. Rabbi Yehuda, af hatamid, even the tamid is also subject to this prohibition. Okay. Rav Shimon says, "HaPesach ba'arba also l'shmoi chayiv." If one slaughtered the Pesach over chametz on the 14th, that means Erev Pesach, and Erev Pesach for its own sake, right? For its own sake, l'shmoi, he's liable. In other words, it's the 14th of Pesach, it's the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach, the time to bring the carbon Pesach. But he still has chametz. He didn't get rid of his chametz, which means he's not allowed to. On that day, and he brings it l'shem yichud, brings it l'shem Pesach, the carbon Pesach. Pafuch, he blew it. He's chayiv. He gets malchus. He's over on the issur of shishchat al chametz dam zivchi. You shall not slaughter my blood, the blood of my sacrifice, over chametz. Ushaloi l'shma. But if on the 14th of Pesach, Erev Pesach, in the afternoon, he shechs it, the carbon Pesach, while he has chametz, but not for the name of Pesach. He shechs it for a shalomim, potter. He's potter. Why? Because the whole carbon is no good. Because even though the rest of the year, if you take an animal that you put aside for a Pesach and you shecht it, it becomes automatically a shalomim, not on Erev Pesach. Because on Erev Pesach, his noilid is born the chiyuv to go ahead and bring a carbon Pesach. So now this animal is a carbon Pesach and not a shalomim. Therefore, if you bring it with the thought of a shalomim, it's completely no good, this animal, this carbon, and it's put to the side, and that's it. We do not throw its blood, etc. So therefore, of course, since it's nothing, the fact that you have chametz means you didn't slaughter anything on this chametz. You didn't slaughter anything on this chametz. It's not a problem, right? It's not about this. Okay? But now we go, Vishar kol hazavachim, all other sacrifice brought also on the 14th, on Erev Pesach, on the 14th of Nisan, Yudalit Nisan, Ben Lishman, Ben Shaloi Lishman, whether he slaughters it for their own sake, for whatever they are, a chatas, a shlomim, etc., well, not a chatas, a shlomim or an asham or anything else, or not for its own sake, for something that's meant to be a shlomim, and he brought it for an asham, potter is potter. Because again, this is, the Gemara is going to come to explain this. Rav Shimon seems to say, even though normally, shaloi l'shmad, shar zavachim, all other sacrifices brought for the wrong name are still a good sacrifice. What they don't do is they don't give the owner his atonement. It's not mechaper for the owner. Nonetheless, normally they can be brought. But says Reb Shimon, Erev Pesach, the rules are completely different for everything. For everything. If other kabbanis are brought on Erev Pesach and they blew it and you did it not for the, what he called, and you did it, if you brought it, whether you slaughtered for their own sake or not for their own sake, the answer is you're potter. Because you had chametz, none of these zavachim, none of these sacrifices are meaningless. They are complete. Oh, hi, I'm back again. What he called completely meaningless. The Gemara is going to explain this. I did too much explaining over here. Let's wait until the Gemara gets it. If somebody takes his Pesach and he blew it, he didn't do it on Erev Pesach. He decides to do it on Pesach itself. In other words, when it's not the Zman to bring the carbon Pesach, it's not the time to bring the sacrificial lamb for the Passover offering. So the answer is Lishma is Potter. If he does it l'shem for the sake of the Pesach, he's completely exempt. He's exempt from this Isser of Lo Yishchat Al Chametz Tam Ziftim because he brought nothing. A carbon Pesach can only be brought on Erev Pesach. Afterwards, it only becomes a Shlomim. Unless, of course, you say, I'm having this in mind for Pesach, for the carbon Pesach. Then the whole carbon is no good. We don't do any of its other avoidance. It's off the ranch. We got to get rid of it. We got to burn it. And therefore, it's meaningless. Means you didn't shecht anything on chametz. So that love you weren't over. Okay? Lishmai potter. Shaloi lishmai. But if he slaughters it not for its own sake. He took this carbon that was supposed to have, that he had put aside for carbon Pesach. It was supposed to be done on Erev Pesach. In the end of the day, he did it in the middle of Chalamoid. And now he's not doing it for its name. He does it for a Shlomim or Stam. He doesn't even say anything. Oh, then he's Chayv. Why? Because Stam Pesach the rest of the year, a Pesach, if you give it the name of something else, a Shlomim, or you don't say anything, it becomes automatically a Shlomim. If it becomes automatically a Shlomim, it's valid. If it's valid, it turns out that you slaughtered a sacrifice on chametz, and you're over on Lo Yishchat Al Chametz Tam Zivki. You should not slaughter my blood, the blood of my sacrifice, over chametz. Period. And that doesn't mean just carbon Pesach. That's any carbon, not over chametz. Don't have chametz around. Okay, which we'll talk about now. This could be B'shar Kol Zabachim, and all the other kind of kabbalas. That means not an animal that was put aside for carbon Pesach. All other animals, things put aside for shalom and for an asham, etc. That was now shechted on Pesach itself, but there's chametz floating around. Ben lishman, ben shaloi lishman, whether we slaughtered for their name, for their own sake. The shlomim for the shlomim, the ashim for the ashim, or not for their own sake. The shlomim for an ashim and the ashim for the shlomim. Chayiv is chayiv. Why is chayiv? Because these kabbanis, all other kabbanis, are valid, even if it's done shaloi lishma, even if it's done not for their name, it's valid. It doesn't atone for the owner, but they're valid sacrifices which can be brought completely. You can do all the other avodas of Kabbalah, Alicha, and Zerika, of sprinkling the blood on the altar and bringing up its Seimurim, its sacrificial parts up on the Mizbeach. Chutz, except min achatas sheshachtu shaloi lishma, except for a chatas that he slaughtered not for its own sake. Since a chatas is born because somebody did an aveira, he did something forbidden, inadvertently, so the animal is attached specifically to this person, to this specific aveira. So therefore, if you go ahead and you blow shaloi lishman, the whole carbon itself is no good. And so chatas and pesach are the two things that, when brought, are no good when you do it for its own name. The pesach, when it's not done on Yud Daled Adar, and if there's chametz around on Yud Daled Adar, the chatas doesn't matter when. If this, what he called the chatas, if it's not brought for its own name, for its own avera, exactly what it needs to do, it's meaningless, and you do not do the avodas with it. You don't do the actions with it, and you've got to go ahead and burn it. You got to put it to the side. And in such a case, you have to put it to the side. You're not over on Lo Yishchat Al Chametz Tam Zivki. You should not slaughter the blood of my sacrifice over chametz. Very good. That's the end of the Mishnah. Zabti Gemara. Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Li'olam. Einoi chayiv, a person is not chayiv ad sheyeh chametz lishchot oy lizarek. One is not chayiv unless there is chametz belonging to either the one who slaughters the offering, okay, which is either the kohen that slaughters the offering or the owner who theoretically could do the slaughtering, or to the one who throws the blood. That means even the kohen who's just being the shliach, the agent of the one who owns the carbon, to sprinkle his blood, because only a kohen is allowed to sprinkle the blood, right? If the guy kohen has chametz around, blown, it's no good. We are now on 63b1. Or those who are registered if one of the people in the group happen to have chametz on them when this is being done, invalid. The adshe imoy ba'azara. But when we say about chametz on them, it means there's no liability for having chametz unless the chametz is with him. Where? In the azara, in the place where we shech the kabbanis, in the place where we do the sacrifices. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, "Apal pi she'ein imoy ba'azara." No, even if the chametz is not with him in the azara, okay, what it called, the liability is incurred. If you bring the Pesach, you will be over on the fact of la yishchat al chametz tam zivchi. You shall not slaughter the blood of my sukkahs over chametz. What is going on over here? The ma'ikam of what are we arguing? So let's just explain this a second. The chametz we're talking about here doesn't have to be in the vicinity, in the eye shot of the carbon Pesach that's brought in the courtyard. So if one of the people, the chametz, whatever it is here in the courtyard, invalid. Yochanan says no, it doesn't have to quite be here. But Yochanan does hold, the Yerushalmi brings up, Yochanan holds, the chametz has to be somewhere in Yerushalayim. It has to be in Jerusalem. That it does. It has to be within the walls of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, as we're going to see. But it does not have to be seen by any one of us over here that are standing in the Azara. That we do not have to have. What becomes problematic with this is about Hasra. In order to get Malchus, in order to get lashes, obviously you have to be over on the Aver, you have to do what is forbidden. But that's not enough. In order to get any kind of punishment from Bezdin, whether it's lashes or even the death penalty, you have to be warned beforehand. This is usher. What you're about to do is usher, is forbidden, is forbidden. And then he still does it. He's been warned. Now he can get it. Without a warning, a specific warning that says, what you're about to do, X, Y, and Z, is forbidden because this is what the halach is, X, Y, and Z. The problem is, if the chametz is not here, how do I know he has chametz? I don't know he has chametz. Maybe there is no chametz. Which would make it an uncertain hasra, an uncertain warning. That's a warning that says, if you have chametz, then X, Y, and Z. But that's not the way warnings work. Warnings work. You have chametz. Don't check your carbon Pesach unless you get rid of that chametz. Not, if you happen to have chametz, then please get rid of it before you shut the carbon. If is an uncertain. Is uncertain. Hang on one second, I'm so sorry. Is uncertain. That already is something else entirely. And that's what our Gemara right here is going to talk about. But my complete, what are we arguing about? Ilema, if you want to say, Ba'al b'samuch kimapligi. When the pasuk says, Lo yishchat al chametz, you shall not slaughter al chametz, on leaven, on chametz, dam zipki, the blood of my sacrifice. What does al mean? On my chametz. Do you say that al means nearby, nearness? The Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Saba Reish Lakish holds al chametz, lo yishchat al chametz, shall not slaughter on chametz, b'samuch, meaning that the chametz has to be near. It has to, the carbon, as it were, has to see the chametz. You don't need samuch near. It has to be in Yerushalayim maybe, but it doesn't have to be near. It doesn't mean that. But then I didn't need them to tell me this over here because they've already argued about this somewhere else. They already argued this in Menachis, in Mesechtes Menachis. Over there, it's not because we learned in the Mishnah. If somebody had to bring a toida, you bring a toida. If you went over the wilderness, you went over the sea, you were released from prison, or you were sick and you got well, you had to bring a carbon toida. With the carbon toida, you had to bring 40 loaves of bread, for all groups of 10 breads, 4 times. Each of the groups of 10 with different types of bread. So obviously the breads were really supposed to be also in the courtyard where you slaughter the taida, the taida offering, the sacrificial taida, the thank you taida. But in this case, Hashoicha taida lefnim. You shechted the taida. You slaughtered the taida inside the courtyard. Inside the courtyard. But the breads were outside the wall, like kadosh alechem. The breads do not become holy. They do not become the kedushas haguf. They don't become intrinsically holy. But what does it mean outside the wall? Rabbi Yochanan has a much more broad understanding of that. Chutz l'chaim is beis pagi. It means outside the walls of beis pagi. Beis pagi was on the walls of Jerusalem, of the old city of Yerushalayim. It was on the walls. So he's saying outside the wall of Beis Pagi, meaning it was outside the walls of Yerushalayim. It was in the suburbs. But if the bread only left the walls of the courtyard, of the Azara, of the courtyard, it's still in Yerushalayim. It's sanctified. Because we do not need al b'samuch. We do not need on to be b'samuch right there. It's enough that it's in Yerushalayim, within the walls of Yerushalayim. Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish says, even if it left the walls of the Azara, so that it's outside the Beis HaMikdash, even though it's already on the Harabayis, on the Temple Mount, or in Jerusalem itself, no good, not Kodesh. Why? Because Almi holds al b'inad al b'samach. Near means close by. So you see, they already argued it by the type of loaves, by the type of breads. So why do you need to bring it up over here with regard to Korban Pesach? Whether what he calls that, Reish Lakish holds that the chametz has to be in the courtyard when you shech the Korban Pesach. And Rabbi Yochanan says no, it only has to be in Yerushalayim. It doesn't have to be so near. Something Gemara, Ella. What are we talking about? What I mentioned to you before, Ba'asroes the Safek Mapligi. They're arguing about a questionable warning in order to get the punishment of malchus, of lashes. In this case, you have to be warned first. Since you can't know for sure if a person has chametz in his house, you could only give a tentative warning that the chametz should not be with him in the courtyard. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish dispute the effectiveness of this warning. Rabbi Yochanan says it's okay if it's not right there, as long as it's in the vicinity, it's within Yerushalayim, such a warning works. Rabbi Lakish says, no, I have to see the chametz. There has to be the possibility to see the chametz. To have to tell me, oh, you got chametz, be warned, don't bring your Korban Pesach. You can't give a warning on an if. It has to be specific, the warning. In other words, Lakish holds, Hasra is suffix lo yishmei Hasra. An uncertain warning is not a warning, and Rabbi Yochanan holds Hasra is suffix shmei Hasra. An uncertain warning is a warning, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you can therefore get malchus, and according to Reish Lakish, you can't get malchus. 63b2, and this is where we're ending. Straight to Gemara, but regarding what you just said about Hasra suffix, about uncertain warning, but they also disagreed about that somewhere else. The itma, because we learned as follows: if a person swore, I make an oath that I will eat this bread, this loaf today. And the day went and he didn't eat it. Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, you do not give malchus. But they said the underlying reason that you do not give him lashes, the underlying reason that you don't give him lashes is for two separate reasons, two different understandings. Rabbi Yochanan, you do not give lashes, mishum dehave lav she'ein by myself, because it's a prohibition in which no action took place. V'chol lav she'ein by myself, and any prohibition that does not have an action, ain't like in a law. You do not give lashes. There has to be an action in order to get lashes. Okay? And what's the situation? Over here he said, I'm going to eat this bread today. And he didn't eat this bread today. So he didn't do anything. That's a lav. He was over on a lav that he made a shvur that was a swearing that was false. a swearing that was false. He was up on the lot, but he doesn't get malchus because no action took place. If it had been just the opposite, if he had said, I will not eat a loaf today, and he eats a loaf today, now that's an action that would get it. But here he said, I will eat a loaf today, and he didn't eat a loaf today. That's an act, a lob that where there is no action. Zakrab Yochanan, lob she'ain by ma'isa, lob that does not have an action. Ain't a loika is not, you do not give malchus. Abol hasra is suffix shemei hasra. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, an hasra, a suffix is an hasra, an uncertain hasra, an uncertain warning is a valid warning. Because here he gave him a warning. Told him, you have to remember, you have to eat the bread today. What do you call it? Because otherwise you're going to be over on the lob of not breaking your word of the swearing that you made. On a shvur shav, on a false swearing. Now he doesn't know what's going to happen the whole day. He doesn't see a bread in his hand and not a bread in his hands. He's uncertain what's going to take place. So you can't know. So he says the warning is a good warning, and he's over on the lav. There is a lav. He's over on the prohibition. He just can't get malchus because we have another rule. You can't get malchus only if there was an action that took place. Here, no action took place. Lav she'ein by ma'isa ain't loikin. But as for the warning was a good warning because if there was an action, like in the case, for an example, where he said, I will not eat a kikar, and he sees him picking up, and he tells him, if you pick up a bread and eat it, you're going to get malchus. Now, the guy doesn't have a bread, nowhere. We don't know if he's going to pick up a bread. That's going to bring him into a problematic situation. According to Rabbi Yochanan, if you warn him, if you should pick up a bread and put it into your mouth and eat, the kazayas, you should know that you will be over on this, on a shvur shav, on a false swearing, and you'll get you'll get malchus. It's in a suffix. I don't know if the guy's going to even pick up a piece of bread. Says Rabbi Yochanan, no, asra. And since he will have done an action of eating the bread, he will get malchus, he'll get lashes. Here, I gave him an asra, he's definitely over on the prohibition. He can't get malchus because he didn't eat. He was supposed to eat, but he didn't eat, he gets malchus. Hold on just 1 second, please. Hello? This is Zimmerman? Yes. Hold on with this. Sorry about that. Important phone call had to be taken. So that's what Yochanan. In this case, he does not get. In this case of swearing that I'm going to eat a piece of bread and he doesn't eat bread, he doesn't get malchus. But he says why? Because it's a questionable warning. And a questionable warning. Does, okay. Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm sorry. Hi. Okay, yeah, so. Okay, so, okay, in fact, I'm going to ask you to let me know that you're going to call. So wait 5 minutes before you go. Okay. You're very, very, and when is this going to start? Let me put it that way. Okay, so this is, okay. So that's important because you're savvy with your history. Okay, so that's why. Yeah, that's okay. No, what do you call? You know what? I want you to ask my sister that question. I personally do not want to, but I do it. But I'm going to speak to my father as well. Okay? Better wait 5 minutes. I'm going to text you to expect your call any minute. Okay? Thank you so much. You got it. Thank you. Call me. If you don't get through, right, if you don't get through, call me back in an hour. Perfect. You got it. Not a problem. Bye-bye. So sorry. Dealing with something with my mother. We will go like this. So, Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish Shem ain't a like and we shouldn't have it le'asra suffix. Asra is suffix, lo yishmei asra. And a unquestionable warning is not a valid warning. Well, he would say the other way. I have a lav she'ei by ma'isa like it Allah. But a lav that doesn't have an action, a forbidden, it still gets malchus. It's a lav, it's a lav, it's a forbidden, it's forbidden, it's forbidden. I don't care if it has an action or no action, it gets malchus. But here I can't because you didn't get the warning. So actually, it turns out that Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan have the same idea that the phone call, just hang 1 second. They both have the same idea. Agency. Okay, so it turns out they both told you don't get malchus, but Reish Lakish says because about a suffix, like Shmei Asra, questionable warning is no warning. Even if I tell you the lav is shame by myself, like even if a lav has no action because it's a prohibition, no matter what, you get malchus. But here you can't because there was no warning, because it was only an uncertain warning. It's just the opposite. Lav shame by myself ain't like another. Truth is, a lav shame by myself, you don't get malchus. You have to have an action in order to get lashes. But Asra is suffix, Shmei Asra, an uncertain warning is it a warning. So you see, we do have such an argument, so I don't need it over here. So Amri says the Gemara Li'olam Ki Al B'Samach Kamafig. We're going back to the old argument that Al Chametz means how close does the Chametz have to be to the carbon Pesach or to the carbon? B'Tzaricha, we need it. The Iyafligulayin in Chametz, if we were arguing only on Chametz, I would have thought Bahu to come Rabbi Yochanan the Levin and Al Samach. It's only over here that by carbon Pesach that I say it doesn't have to be so close. It's enough that the Chametz is in Yerushalayim to what he called make it a problem that you're over on the lav. We shouldn't be isuhu because having chametz is an issa is prohibited. The cholecha the issa wherever it is. Wherever your chametz is, if you have it on Pesach, you got a problem, right? In Mekadosh Lechem regarding the breads, the 40 breads that come along with your thank you offering, the carbon taida, like kiddush elabifnim, it only becomes sanctified only when it's inside the walls of the courtyard. He would agree with Reish Lakish. That I need, you would agree with Reish Lakish, that I need it to be al hasamuch. It has to be near, it has to be within the courtyard. Because if it's inside the courtyard, it would become sanctified, and if it's not, it won't be sanctified because it's very similar. It's similar to a sacred core vessel. When you have a holy vessel, a vessel that's in the base of Mikdash, it's only Mekadosh things. It only makes other things sanctified when those other things go inside the vessel. So the vessel itself is the thing that makes the thing holy. Same thing with the breads. I might have thought the breads, in order for the breads to become holy, they have to be within the vessel of the courtyard of the base of Mikdash. Therefore, Tzaricha, I had to say that Rabbi Yochanan holds even the breads could still be in Yerushalayim. It's good enough. But if we were only talking about the taida breads, the 40 breads that come along with the carbon taida, with the thank you offering, only over there, this Reish Lakish said that I need it to be near. The breads have to be in the courtyard together with the carbon. The E is Gavi Kaddish, Eloi, Loi Kaddish. Because if it's inside the courtyard, it becomes sanctified, and if not, it doesn't become sanctified. But regarding chametz, you might agree that you don't need the chametz right near. The chametz doesn't have to be with the carbon pesach in the courtyard. The asur, because chametz is also. And wherever it is, it is. Therefore, we need Reish Lakish to tell us Zeppelin by comments. I don't care. Here it has to be samach, and that's the way it is. Very good. Everybody have a good Shabbos. We're up to by Baimine Rabbi Shmei Rabami, and that's where we're going to pick it up on Sunday. Good Shabbos, everybody.